the story of my high school dating life, which was back when I looked like this. I was never sure whether it was a good idea to ask a girl out. So I'd walk around school and I'd see this girl I'm interested in. After I talked to my best friend, I'd go on to kind of my core friend group. And I'd see, can I really communicate this idea to them? I'd say things like, hey, imagine me dating this girl. We're going out for burgers and you'll join us for a milkshake. And I'd kind of make sure that I can communicate it. After that, I'd move on and I'd kind of get that initial feedback from kind of the dating expert of my school. This was the guy who, of all of us, really understood women, if there is such a thing. After I got his feedback, I found out that pretty much naturally, everybody at my school knew that I was into this girl. My friends had told their friends, and their friends had told friends of friends, and everybody was giving their feedback on kind of my love interest. And so it's funny, but by the time when it was time to actually ask her out, I'd already gotten all of this information. And so I knew that it was a good idea. I knew that it made sense for me to ask her out. But I couldn't just walk up to her and say, hey, you and me, we're going to hold hands in the cafeteria, make smooches, you know, all that good stuff. It's a bit much. So let's say that I notice that there's a dance coming up. I walk up to her and I say, hey, how about we just go to this dance? Just this simple thing, a little test. And if she says yes, well then, it's time for me to really go all out. I know that it's a good idea that we go out. My friends know that it's a good idea. Her friends know that it's a good idea. She says yes, I'm going to spend not only the dance getting to know her, but the 2 weeks before, going on dates, really trying to understand her. Because in dating, just like in anything, if it's ever going to succeed, you really have to put a lot of effort into it. So that was kind of my dating life in high school. And as you'll notice, it kind of goes through something of a process of natural selection, where at each step, some of the ideas could die. So this kind of brings me to the topic of natural selection of ideas. So I kind of noticed the idea of natural selection of ideas when I was at a monastery in Thailand. The Buddhists have a lot of philosophy about how you relate to your thoughts, how you relate to your ideas, that you can choose which ones to accept and which ones to let go. So I realized that I really wanted an objective framework for being able to determine which ones I wanted to follow and which ones I wanted to dismiss. Because back in high school, I had all of these different ideas. These were ideas like, you know, should I join this club or that club? Should I even apply to college? Should I go to college? When I want to go to college, what should I major in? And over time, I found that these ideas only increased in intensity and difficulty. And so it was really tough. To be honest, I was really afraid. I was making a lot of big life decisions, and it was really scary. So now that I'm an adult, I find it really valuable to have a way to determine kind of objectively which of my ideas are good ideas. And I touched on it naturally with the dating example, but here, let me walk you through it now. So the first step is kind of that inner circle. And we saw this with dating. The real question that I find with my framework is, you know, at the first step, does it even sound good to me? Because I have ideas all the time. We all do. And so that first step is to talk to people and say, hey, does this idea make sense when I say it aloud? I find it really valuable to have a core group of 4 or 5 friends who I can be silly around, who I can say ideas and not feel like I'm going to be judged, who I can say ideas that will be crazy or offensive or who knows what. Because sometimes when you give an idea structure, when you really say it, you find out whether it even makes sense to you. So that's the step that I call my inner circle. And after an idea passes my inner circle, if it does, I move on and I start communicating that idea to a wider group of friends. And the goal of this step is to make sure that I can clearly communicate it. Because later I'm going to want to be getting information. on that feedback on my idea, and it's important that I'm getting that feedback on the idea itself, not on things that are, say, tangentially related to the idea, or little rabbit holes that aren't really core parts. So that second step is to really pitch it a lot and make sure that I can communicate the essence of my idea. After I can clearly communicate an idea, I'm now able to get feedback on it. And that feedback, that initial feedback, I like to get from about 10 people who are really experts at giving feedback. These don't even have to be good friends. These are just people who I would trust their feedback. For example, in the dating world, this would be my friend who seems really good with women. After that initial feedback, it's time to get some broad feedback. And this naturally happens in high school dating, for me at least, with kind of where everybody knows and everybody's giving their own input. But for other ideas, I find it valuable to, once I know that the idea seems reasonable from that initial feedback, to see as many people as possible. This would be pitching the idea to Uber drivers. When somebody asks me what I do for a living, telling them, hey, I have this idea, what do you think of this idea? And when you get broad feedback on an idea, you can learn not only what about it seems reasonable, but also who likes that idea. So I call that next step getting broad feedback. After I've gotten broad feedback on the idea, I want to make a prototype of it. Some initial first step to really make sure that when you have the idea and you set it out in the wild a little bit, it still works. This could be, for example, say writing a blog post on a topic, or walking around high school and seeing how many people will sign up for the club that you're thinking of starting, or doing a TEDx on a topic before you consider writing about it in a book. And after that initial prototype, if my idea has been able to pass through all of these steps and succeed, I know it's a good idea, and so it's really time to commit. And committing is really important, because at some point you have to draw on a line in the sand and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to put the effort into it, and I'm going to see this thing through to completion. Because doing things is tough. And often an idea will fail many times before it succeeds. Or often you'll have unforeseen difficulties. And so you really need to know before you commit to an idea, before you put a lot of time and effort into it, that it's the right one to be committing to. But when you do, you got to go all out with it. So this is the framework I call natural selection of ideas. And you saw how it naturally kind of worked in high school dating. But it works in other areas as well. For example, when I graduated college last year, I knew I wanted to write a book. But I had 30, 40, 50 ideas for what topic to write on. So I ran them through this process. At first, I was talking my ideas out with friends just to see what they sounded like to me, if they sounded reasonable. Then, I moved on and I made sure that I could clearly communicate those ideas, so that when I later got feedback from my friends, a lot of literary friends at first, I was able to make sure that I was getting that feedback on the idea itself. My literary friends, kind of the experts in the book world that I know, were really helpful for that initial feedback because I was able to find out what they liked about it. So that then when I got broad feedback, you would have caught me pitching the idea when I was waiting in line for a concert, or whenever an Uber driver starts up a conversation with me. I only had about 3 ideas that got it past all of those steps and ended up going to a prototype. But when I did make that outline and I started shopping it around, I found that it was incredibly valuable. I was able to get a lot of incredible feedback on that prototype and know who likes what about it, so that then when I spent a year of my life writing a book, I was pretty confident and I knew what people liked and what people wouldn't like. So there's a lot of value to going through this kind of objective process. And part of that value is because we see pretty often the danger of people skipping some of these steps. For example, in the creative world, you see a lot of people who come up with an idea, and then they share their idea with friends, maybe kick around it a little bit, but then they jump all the way to the end, and they try to write the entire screenplay, only to realize that the audience isn't as big as they thought it was. Or, for example, the idea is only one that they and their friends actually ended up caring about. On the other hand, I've shared my book with the first 2 chapters with about 50 people. And I already know what people like about it and what people don't like about it. I already know what my target audience is. I haven't even gone into the publishing world yet, but I'm going to be able to talk to publishers and say, hey, I already have this data. Hell, if I want to, I can even just go self-publish because I know the number of people and the demographics and all of the areas that people already like about it. By going through kind of an objective system, I'm able to build to that success. So this is my system. I call it natural selection of ideas, and I like it. You're welcome to use it too if you're interested in it. Maybe try it out. But the key, if there's a single key of this talk, is not necessarily using my system, but having a system. Having an objective way to test your ideas in order to see which ones end up working and which ones don't. Because we're constantly being demanded with ways in order to spend our time and spend our energy. And if you don't have a system, you're just going to end up being buffeted around by ideas from day to day. I remember back in high school, I was deeply, deeply, passionately in love, writing her name on my notebooks in love for about a day. And then the next day I realized that, wait, that wasn't actually a great idea. So if you have an objective system, then you're able to measure which of your ideas succeed and which fail. You can keep track, and you can have a success rate that is consistent. And as we saw with dating, which as we all know is the most important aspect of a life, if you have an objective system and you use the steps consistently, you can take the luck out of getting lucky. Thank you.